Hey everybody, I'm Caston. I studied horticulture at UGA and have done some jobs where I've been hands-on gardening. So this is something I'm pretty familiar with. It sounds like some of the things I'll touch on today are things you may have gone into more depth in previous classes of the series. Um, but yeah, I'm just going to get started and then I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So we're going to start with the very basics. So planting your garden. So it sounds like a lot of you may already have your garden, but if you're starting a new site, it's really important that you have a sunny area with good drainage. Drainage is everything, especially with vegetables. And then you have to choose your planting type. So it sounds like you guys learned about container gardening. That's one thing I'll just touch on. It's a great option. If you don't have a lot of space, you can add all of your own soil and amendments, easy to move around. And one of the most accessible ones, you can move it close to your home so you can just go out and grab whatever you'd like. Fewer weeds because you're adding everything to the containers. But the downside is it's not a lot of space to grow. So kind of moving one step up, raised beds, you have a lot more space. It's essentially a much larger container garden, so that means a lot more soil and amendments, which can get pricey, especially when you take into account the material costs. But because you're adding everything, you have fewer weeds to deal with, and you have a lot more control about your soil. And then the most traditional option is a garden plot. So that's, a traditional in the ground garden. You have a lot of space to grow. It's easy to expand your garden if you want to keep improving and making it bigger, but you do have to till and amend that soil. It's also going to require either, bending over or kneeling down. So that's not an option for everybody. And then, of course, requires a bit more weed control. So soil testing, super important step. We always recommend it, but we especially recommend it when growing vegetables because they require so many nutrients. So test your soil for those nutrients and the pH. The pH you're looking for is 6.2 to 6.8. And I'm sure you all know that you can do it through your local extension office. If you don't have that
Caston,
oh, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Your sound is kind of going in and out in volume.
Oh, let me try. Let me see if this works better. Is this better?
I was worried it was me, but it sounds like some other folks are hearing you the same.
Okay. Is it a little more consistent this way?
Yes.
Okay, I was using headphones, but we'll try it this way.
Thank you.
Of course, yes. Sorry about that, everybody. So if you're not going to do a soil test, a 10-10-10 fertilizer is a good starting point. And then preparing your garden site. So if you're doing an in-ground garden, you want to till that area 5 to 6 inches deep and incorporate any organic matter you have. If you are somebody who likes to compost, you can mix that in. And then you're going to want to apply your fertilizer based on those soil test recommendations. There's a couple different options with planting. Of course, you can use seeds straight from the package and just going to want to plant them to the depth indicated by that package. And then transplants are a great option as well. And then, of course, think about spacing. Larger plants like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, they're going to need about 1 to 2 feet in between each other. And then you want those rows to be at least 3 feet apart. This is a really great table from one of our publications. And if you don't have your seeding packs or anything like that, you can go based on this as far as seed planting depth and row spacing. Another important thing to consider is your days from planting to harvest. You want to keep in mind those first frost dates and how hardy things are. A lot of that information can be found in our growing guides and on the packets, but that those days from planting to harvest are really important when you're planting and planning out your season. So choosing your crops. Some do a lot better as transplants, and actually this table will show you which method of planting works best for what crops. Some can work either way. Broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, are all going to do better as transplants. So that means you can either purchase them from basically any home and garden store, or you can do it yourself by starting them indoors. So that's going to require either more money or more planning. But there's lots of things that you can just direct seed into the garden and you don't even need to think about that. So lettuce, carrots, radishes, and greens, those can all be direct seeded, and those are typically going to be a pretty fast turnaround for a crop. And then think about how much space you have and how much you want to produce. We'll talk a lot about space because that is really important with winter diseases and fall diseases because it is so wet. Airflow is going to be one of your most useful tools to preventing disease in your garden. And with that is irrigation. So when you plant, newly planted seeds and transplants should be watered in really well, really deeply, immediately to help them get established. And you're going to want to keep that up every day for the first week or so that the seeds can germinate and the transplants can acclimate, the roots can get down into the soil. After you have that, they can just be watered as needed. You can kind of see and monitor, but it's going to be approximately 1 to 2 inches a week. So there's soaker hoses and drip irrigation. Those are going to be the best options. They just lay on the soil, so that's water's going directly down, so it's more efficient, and then it's not getting any water on that foliage, which, like I mentioned, is really important for disease control. And then, overhead watering certainly has its place. It's a lot easier. It doesn't involve as much setup, but you do have to take into account that it's going to wet the foliage, and then you'd probably have to run it for a lot longer to get that same amount of water down to the roots. So I'm going to talk about some cool season crops. Radishes. I know that this is probably not one of the most popular options, but I personally really like it.
Caston,
super.
we're still having audio go in and out.
Hope that it will be working now. And let me know.
Absolutely. Take it away.
Okay, so back to radishes. I really enjoy it because it's super fast. It's only about 30 days from planting to harvest, and they're super easy to direct seed. If you have kids or maybe you have a school garden, something like that, this is a great way to introduce kids to gardening because it is so fast and there's so many different beautiful colors and varieties. You can do multiple plantings in a season because that is such a quick turnaround. And like I said, I know it's not everybody's favorite, but if the kind of spicy radish is not something you enjoy, I would recommend trying some of the Asian daikon varieties. They tend to be a lot more mild and sweet. And then they can be used in a lot of different ways. Raw, roasted, they can be pickled. So there's some fun things you can do. And then I love to just play around with all the different colors. It looks really beautiful and striking in a salad. Another one, carrots. So carrots are another it's another root vegetable, and it's one that people are probably it's more common, but there are a lot of really cool varieties. There's red ones, there's purple carrots, and these are also easy to direct seed with a little bit of work at the beginning. So when you do see that, it's really useful to kind of moisten the soil at first so that they won't blow away when you put them down. Cover the seeds with a shallow, just 1/4 inch of soil, and then water again really carefully, not to wash them away. And then they take 60 to 70 days, depending on the variety. And something to keep in mind is it's going to be really important to thin them out once they're about 1 inch in height. We want to make sure there's 2 inches between plants so they can get to their full size. So there's some really fun varieties, like I mentioned, color-wise, but these two photos that we have here, the one on top is the Thumbelina. They're super tiny, very cute, and they do well in heavy soils like we have in Georgia. And then the other one is my personal favorite, which is the Golden Chantenay. And I just love the shape of it. They're really satisfying to pull up and they're just delicious. So highly recommend those. Garlic. So garlic is a really fun one. It does take a long time to grow. It takes about 8 months. So it's something you have to have some patience to commit to, but planting in late September through November. Just make sure that you don't do it where you've previously grown onions or other members of the onion family. And so it's a little different than growing a lot of other things. You're going to plant the cloves, which are going to be the segments of the bulb. You have the unpeeled garlic clove with the pointed side up in the soil, and the scar stem or the basal plate, the flat part, down and facing down in the soil. You just cover that up and have it in an area that won't be disturbed. You'll start to see the little shoots of it pop up, which I think is just really fun to watch. There are some specifics for harvesting. You want to keep an eye in the spring, summer, early summer when they're finishing up. You will start to see the tops of the leaves begin to dry and kind of bend over. Once you start to see that, you don't want to water because they're kind of drying out, and then you're going to pull them up when 1/3 to 1/2 of the leaves have died back. And then you can let them dry out in the sun and then store in a dark, cool place. If you have pretty consistent cool temperatures and good air circulation, you can store your garlic for more than 6 months. So you basically can just have your own garlic supply, not need to go buy any for a good long time. Up top, you'll see some photos of garlic braiding, which is a fun activity to do. And then it's really decorative and beautiful, and it's a great way to hang them up and keep them in storage. And then another great thing about garlic is once you've harvested it, you don't have to buy new garlic to plant. You just keep those largest and the best form bulbs for planting next season. It's kind of a closed loop once you start. Lettuce. Kind of an obvious one, but I love lettuce and I love how many different kinds you can grow and all of the colors. Obviously, there's green, but there's red and some different kind of variegated multicolored ones. Great to grow by seed or transplants, but this will be something you have to thin out if you do it by seed. A great part of it is you don't have to wait for a whole head to form. You can harvest the outer leaves and let the rest continue to grow, which I love because you can just use it throughout the season. You don't have to pull it up and then be done with it. You will eventually maybe start to see it get kind of skinny. There may become a point where it is going to be better to just harvest the whole head. And then something to keep in mind with our, warm season here in Georgia, the best germination is going to be below 70 degrees. So may have to wait a little while for that. There are varieties that do a lot better in heat that you can find, and I can recommend some specific ones. But romaine, bib, and loose leaf varieties all do pretty well in Georgia. But if you do some research or look at some seed companies, you'll see that there are some that do better with heat than others. The strawberries. I think most people think of these as a spring crop, but you can actually set them out in the fall for them to take some time to be established and then harvest them in the spring. So that means once they're getting established, you don't have as much disease pressure as you do in the summer and spring. So you can set them out from September 15th to the beginning of November. Just have to make sure that when you plant them, you have to really water them intensely and let them get established so that they don't dry out and can make it through. Of course, potted plants, they work really well in containers, and then that's going to require less water in general. Cauliflower. So this is something that's definitely going to do better as a transplant. You can start them inside, start your own transplants by starting seeds inside at the end of July, or you can just purchase some and do it in the last week of August. So something interesting about cauliflower is that if you want to have that, white cauliflower color, you have to either buy a self-blanching type or blanch them yourselves, which is just kind of gathering the leaves, covering the cauliflower, and tying it. So that's just protecting it from the sun and keeping the inside of it white. There are plenty that self-blanch, and that's a much easier option. There's also some different colored cauliflower, like this purple, that's going to be the graffiti cauliflower, and the orange one on the bottom is the cheddar variety. So those colors, you don't need to tie them. You just kind of let them do their thing, and then you have that gorgeous color. So those were some different crops that I love to grow. But there are some specifics with some of these crops. So heavy feeders, you may have heard that term. These are just crops that require extra amount of nutrients. This is actually going to be information that's included in the soil test that you do. I chose this, took this image at the bottom just straight from a soil test. So whatever your recommendation is, you're just going to increase it by 50% for these crops. So the soil tests are really nice because they make it very easy and clear. So boron is a micronutrient that we don't really think about that much, but it is pretty important for a lot of our fall crops. Cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, and turnips are all heavy boron feeders. And the deficiencies can look like the outer leaves yellowing. You may see the curds of the cauliflower kind of stunted or brown. And then hollow stems in broccoli and cauliflower, which are the pictures on the top. I don't know if you've ever harvested broccoli and then cut into it and had that hollow stem, but it's not a fun surprise. You may also have come across some soft brown centers in the center of root vegetables. Turnips and rutabagas will have it. And really the way to avoid that is to follow the fertilizer recommendations on the soil test. It'll include this from the bottom. I took that right from a soil test report as well. And you just apply 1 tablespoon of borax per 100 feet for the crops that need it. And you can mix it with soil and apply it, or with water. So it's really not that hard, but it will be a big help. You really want to avoid these because it's a nasty surprise after you've spent all that time growing these crops. Because cauliflower and broccoli are not that quick either. So cover crops. This is something that is going to be a really useful tool, especially if you're not planning on using your entire garden in the fall. You can do just parts of it that you're not using, or if you want to opt out of doing a fall garden, you shouldn't let it just sit there unused. Cover crops can prevent erosion. It'll add organic matter and keeps weeds at bay. It's going to outcompete those weeds, and just giving all of that garden space something to do so the weeds don't come in. There's cover crops that fix nitrogen. Those are going to be legume cover crops. And I'll show a whole chart of cover crops next. But these will be planted in early September, going into the first part of October. And some of the most popular ones are going to be crimson clover, like that picture in the middle. Super beautiful. Cereal rye, vetch, that's going to be the one on the right with those purple flowers. Peas on the left, which also has flowers that you can use in arrangements or just admire. And oats, those are all good options for Georgia. So this chart is going to be a few pages of it. It's more information than you'll really need, but just wanted to show that there's, lots of different cover crop options with different benefits. So some can fix here, I'll show you. Legumes can add nitrogen to the soil. Some are better at fighting erosion. Some are better at building up your soil. So there's lots of options. And then pests. There's not as much pest pressure in the fall and winter compared to the summer, but they're still there. They can be a lot harder to find. So scouting is going to be important. You want to look between the leaves and under foliage, like those outer leaves of cabbage. They can hide right in there where it's kind of damp and hidden. There's organic options like BT for insect control that you can use kind of before damage becomes bad. That's something that's a little bit more preventative. If you get a really bad infestation, it can only do so much. But one of the main pests is the cabbage loopers. They become moths. They can do some serious damage to broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kale, all that stuff. Floating row covers, which is just kind of this fabric that goes on top. In this image, I would definitely want it to be more secured on the sides versus what it's showing. But I can be pretty effective at preventing the cabbage looper moths from laying the eggs in there. So you're basically just excluding it. And then, of course, any pesticide recommendations, if you come across a problem, you see a pest that you want to address, best thing to do with that is to contact your local UGA extension office, and then you can get a recommendation from our pest management handbook. And that can usually be a conversation with managing pests. So disease, again, not as big of an issue as, say, the summer when it's really hot and humid, but we tend to have some pretty wet winters here. So things like powdery mildew and downy mildew can become big problems. That humid, stagnant air and the water sitting on top of the plants is what's going to lead to a lot of those disease issues. So air circulation is a good way to combat that, and that's going to come down to spacing. You don't want to crowd your plants because then there's just more water, more space where water is staying on the leaves, and that's where you're going to see problems. And then if you have specific issues, again, you can contact your local extension office and you can get recommendations out of the handbook. So, fruit tree planting. I know that this is something that you've kind of talked about in previous sessions, but fall is the best time to plant trees and shrubs. So fruit trees, as well as ornamental shrubs, herbaceous perennials, all of that is going to be great to do in the fall because roots will grow best when the soil is warm in between 55 and 75 degrees. In the summer, it's so hot and things are drying out, but you're going to have nice warm soil and not as much drying out in the fall. So yeah, that's going to give it plenty of time for roots to be established and then kind of prepare themselves for the winter and future years of healthy growth. Soil test is also great for fruit tree planting. There's specific tests for specific fruit crops. And then there's also lots of UGA publications for the specific fruit trees that you want to grow. And that will give you, you can go based off of your soil test, but that'll give you other fertilizer recommendations, pruning recommendations, all of the good stuff that you need to know. So some resources, there are home vegetable and fruit guides for essentially any fruit or vegetable that you want to grow. And this link will take you to the list of all of them. So say you want to grow strawberries at home, there's a comprehensive publication about basically any question you might have. And then there's a cover crop publication with some that are more focused on homeowner uses. And this is my information. I went by a little bit faster than I thought, but we have plenty of time for a discussion or any questions.
Thank you so much, Caston. Before I stop the recording, I do want to mention that I'll put all of these links, drop them in the chat and on our YouTube channel. I'll include them in the description so you can be sure to go back and find them. And I wanted a few of these questions to be answered while still on the recording. We wanted to make sure that when you say borax, are we talking about from the laundry aisle? Where do we find this mysterious thing that sounds so familiar?
You are right. It does not sound like that would be correct, right? But borax can be used in the garden.
So just in your neighborhood grocery store is is where you'll go to be able to support those heavy feeders. Well, thank you, Caston. I'm going to go ahead and pause our recording.